Okay, today we're going to go over how to graph line graphs. Okay, so we're often going to be, in science, we're often going to see data presented to us, and we have to be able to both interpret that data, which means we have to understand what it's telling us, but we also have to be able to graph a data set so we can understand it a little bit better. Okay, so for today's lesson, I'm going to go over a couple of basic things, and I'll show you guys two examples, and we'll go from there. Okay, so usually when someone's conducting an experiment, we have an independent variable and we have a dependent variable. Okay, so my independent variable, for the sake of this class, we'll keep it simple. It's the thing. So it's the thing we change. So whatever we're changing of that experiment. Okay, this is often, or this is not often, this will be your x-axis. Okay, my dependent variable, that's what we are measuring. So that's what we are going to measure. That is my y-axis. Okay, so remember that if we're looking at a graph, this would be my x-axis, right? And this would be my y. Okay, so this is where I have my independent variable. This is where I have my dependent variable. So here I'm showing, what am I changing and how does it affect my dependent variable, whatever we're measuring. Okay, so let's look at an example here. So in this example here, we have amount of water added in gallons and plant height. Actually, this doesn't even have a unit, so I'm going to add a unit. Let's say it's centimeters. Okay, so this is what we're changing, right? So that's my independent variable. You're always going to see it's always listed on the left-hand side. That's my x value. Then my y value here, my y value is my dependent variable, what I'm measuring, which is the height. Okay, so let's go over how to graph this. So first thing you want to do is when we're starting a graph, you want to first label everything. Okay, so that's one of the more important parts. So I'm going to go ahead and label the bottom. So the bottom is going to be amount. It's going to be amount of water that I'm adding, right? In gallons. In gallons. Okay. All right. The top of this, or the side of this rather, it's going to be my plant height. So this is my plant height in centimeters. Okay. All right. Now let's start putting in numbers. So in order to figure out which numbers we have to put here, we have to look at our data. So one common mistake that people do is they see that it's 10, 20, 40, right? And they just put 10, 20, 40. You can't do that. Each box has to be equal space. So if I'm looking at my data, I have to look at my lowest point and my highest point. My lowest point is 10. My highest point is 80. So I think if we go by, we can go by 10s or we can go by 20s. I'm just going to go by 20s to make our data a little bit easy. Okay, so I'm going to go equal amounts of 20. So I'm going to go 20, 40, 60, and 80. Okay, I could have gone by 10s as well. That's fine. Now let's look at this. I start at 2 and I end up at 30, right? So I can go by 2s, but that's going to take a while. It's going to be 2, 4. So I can go by 3s. And so I'm going to go by by 5s. I think that'll keep this data set pretty close to it, right? So I can go 5 equal amounts, 10, 15, 20, 25, and 30. All right, so now I have my numbers. So now I just go ahead and graph. So remember, this is my x. This is my y. So I just follow this. So the first one, when I had 10 gallons is going to be here, right, halfway. I had a growth of about 2 centimeters. So 2 would be like right here. So that would be my point right there. 10 and 2. That's my first point, right? Then we'll go to the next point. My next point is 20 and 6. So it'd be 20 here and 6 up here. And I can connect these two to show a trend, right? My next point is 40 and 12. So 40, 12 would be a little above 10, right? A little above 10. And then my last one is 80 and 30. So 80 and 30 all the way up here. Okay. So we connect these, and so we end up seeing what we call a positive correlation. When I increase the water, things get taller. Okay, it's a positive correlation. Okay, so now let's look at another example. This one I'm gonna make this graph from scratch. So it says, this is my X, my independent. This is my Y, my dependent. Okay, I'm changing the number of water stations in the city. And I'm trying to look at how that affects the number of hospital visits. Okay, so let's go ahead and look at this data. So I draw my graph, right? I keep it simple. I'm going to go here, what I'm going to do. So I first start by labeling everything. So this would be number of stations. Okay. And on this side, I'm going to have hospital visits. I'm just going to put visits. Okay, so number of visits, because I don't want to write that whole thing. All right. Now I'm just going to create equal spaces. So just create some equal spaces here. Okay. Then we'll figure out the numbers right now. All right. So let's figure out the numbers. So let's first look at my X. We always start, don't try to look at both data sets. Just look at one at a time. So I start with 30 and I start with 0 and I end with 30. So I think, and if we notice, my data goes up by 10. So we can just go by 10s. So I'm going to go 10, 20, 30. That's it. We'll keep it simple, okay? All right. Now, this data set, if you notice, my lowest number is 100, my highest number is 150. So it's kind of a strange, it's like very high and then low, not that low. So we can go by 50s or we can go by 20s, but we have to start at 0. We always start at 0. Keep that in mind. It's always 0 and we go up. You can't just plot 150 here. So we'll go 50, 100, and 150. You could have also gone by 25s. That would have worked as well. Okay. But I'm trying to keep it simple, so we're just going by 50s here. So when I had 0 water stations, there was 150 cases per year. So I'm going to put a dot here. Okay. Because I went 0 and then up to 150, because that's my X, this is my Y. When I had 10, it went down a little to about 120. So 120 is going to be a little bit above 100, right? Then when I added 20 water stations, it dropped down to 110. So not too much difference, but it dropped down a little. Then when I added 30 water stations, we had only 100 visits per year. So it would be lower than that because this was 110, right? We connect my graph. Connect, connect, connect. Okay? So that's what we would call a negative correlation. And it goes down. So the more stations I increase, the less people I have visiting the hospital. That's what that graph is telling me. Okay? So that's really what you have to be able to do. You have to be able to plot. Sometimes the hardest part is figuring out which numbers go there. Okay? So that's pretty much it. And we'll go over the rest later on.